My name is Teresa, and I am 33 years old. I work as a bookkeeper in a quiet, unassuming veterinary clinic nestled right off Route 9. If my job has taught me anything, it's that numbers are completely devoid of emotion. They don't have hidden agendas. They don't borrow money. They have no intention of paying back, and they certainly don't try to manipulate you over a holiday dinner. They just sit there on the screen, perfectly balanced, completely honest. I've always found a deep sense of comfort in that honesty, because for a very long time, my own life was filled with people who treated truth like a moving target. I want you to take a second, grab a warm cup of coffee, and really sit with me through this story. Because if you've ever been the dependable one in your family, the person everyone runs to when a bill is overdue, but the very first person they forget to invite when it's time to celebrate, then what I'm about to share is going to hit very close to home. If that sounds like a reality you've had to live through, do me a favor right now. Drop a comment below or just type the word recognize so I know who is sharing this space with me today. Let's talk about the day everything changed. It was a scorching afternoon late in June, and my phone rang exactly 22 times in the span of a single hour. I know the precise number because my 8-year-old daughter Lily was sitting right next to me on our beach blanket counting each vibration. To her, it was a hilarious little game. She giggled every time the screen lit up, completely unaware of the absolute storm brewing on the other end of that digital connection. We were sitting on the quiet, sun-drenched shores of Tybee Island, roughly 300 miles away from the small town outside Atlanta we called home. I was watching my 5-year-old son, Jake, wearing a pair of gray rubber shark goggles, frantically digging a massive hole in the sand with a cheap plastic shovel. For the first time in 4 long, exhausting years, I had actively chosen my own children over the heavy, suffocating weight of my birth family's expectations. I had my bare feet buried in the warm sand. The salty Atlantic breeze was washing over my face, and I felt a profound sense of liberation. But while I was enjoying that rare moment of peace, my mother and my older sister, Denise, were standing in a crowded, sweltering parking lot at a luxury resort in Hilton Head, South Carolina. Denise was losing her mind, screaming at a helpless front desk clerk who politely refused to hand over the keys to a pair of oceanfront suites that hadn't actually been paid for. My mother was standing right beside her, clutching her purse, desperately dialing my number over and over again, begging for a financial rescue that was never going to come. At that exact moment on the beach, I didn't know the full details of their public meltdown. All I knew was the steady rhythm of the ocean waves and the undeniable fact that the old Teresa, the version of me that would have instantly panicked, apologized, and emptied her own bank account to save them from their own greed, was officially gone. Those 22 frantic phone calls weren't the start of our family's problems. They were the absolute, chaotic end of a beautifully orchestrated plan. Let me take you back to the very beginning, to the quiet spreadsheet where the real battle was fought. To truly understand how we ended up on that beach with a buzzing phone, you have to look at the numbers. As a bookkeeper making $47,000 a year at Dr. Calloway's veterinary clinic, I lived my life by a strict 14-column spreadsheet. Every single dollar had a name, a destination, and a purpose. I clipped coupons, bought gas exclusively on Tuesdays to save 6 cents a gallon, and tracked our lives down to the penny. Being a single mother to Lily and Jake meant there was absolutely no room for error. Their father had walked out when Jake was just a baby, leaving nothing behind but an empty apartment and a mountain of stress. He isn't a part of this story because the real storm in my life didn't come from the man who left. It came from the family who stayed. In my family, being good with money wasn't viewed as a commendable skill. It was viewed as a target. People don't resent you for being broke. They resent you for being careful. They look at your savings account, built from skipped dinners and generic brand groceries, and they see an untapped resource for their own desires. My older sister, Denise, was the exact opposite of me. She drove a leased Lexus, lived in a house with a pristine backyard pool, and constantly complained about being broke while drowning in high-interest consumer debt. She was intelligent, cunning, and highly perceptive, especially when it came to manipulating people's emotions. The only person who truly understood the reality of our family dynamic was my father, Robert Young. He was a hardworking plumber who spent 40 years crawling under houses, destroying his knees and hands to build a life for us. 4 years ago, he was sitting in a sterile room at Grady Memorial Hospital, his kidneys failing, knowing his time was incredibly short. Denise and I stood on opposite sides of his hospital bed, like matching bookends that belonged to completely different stories. My father reached under his pillow and pulled out a heavy manila envelope containing his life insurance policy, my mother's bank logins, and a handwritten list of monthly utility bills. He looked past Denise, locked his tired eyes onto mine, and whispered, "Teresa, I need you to handle things. Keep the lights on for your mama. That's all I'm asking." Denise didn't say a single word in that hospital room. She waited until we were inside the elevator, her face pale with a mixture of anger and humiliation. Before I even reached my car in the parking garage, my phone buzzed. It was a text from her. "Dad always liked you better. Enjoy your little promotion." She couldn't see that our father didn't choose me because of favoritism. He chose me because Denise had already bounced 3 checks to the electric company in a single year and had taken thousands from his retirement fund without ever paying it back. He loved her deeply, but he simply didn't trust her with a checkbook. When he passed away that rainy Tuesday in October, the $85,000 life insurance policy arrived. I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator and systematically cleared $31,000 of his medical debt, spent $8,000 repairing the rotted subfloor in my mother's bathroom, and replaced a failing water heater. The remaining $22,000 went directly into a locked savings account under my mother Lorraine's name, an untouchable emergency fund. On top of managing that, I set up an automatic $300 monthly transfer from my own personal checking account directly to my mother to bridge her grocery and prescription gap. Her $1,400 Social Security check only went so far. Denise, despite her luxury lifestyle and leased vehicles, contributed absolutely nothing. Her excuse was always the same: "I have my own family to worry about." But what Denise lacked in financial contributions, she more than made up for in toxic leverage. She knew our mother's deepest vulnerability was her grandchildren, and Denise weaponized her kids, Madison and Tyler, like currency. She casually told our mother that if I was invited to family gatherings on the weekends, she simply wouldn't bring her kids around anymore. And just like that, to maintain the peace, my mother stopped inviting me. I was reduced to a midweek visitor, a background character in my own family, expected to quietly pay the bills while being erased from the picture. Every single summer since I was 9 years old, our family had a sacred tradition: a week-long trip to Jekyll Island. It was the one time of the year where nobody argued about money, because Dad took care of everything. After he passed, I couldn't bear to let that beautiful memory die, especially since my daughter Lily loved the tide pools so much. So, I kept the tradition alive out of my own pocket. I booked the rooms, organized the groceries, and quietly subsidized the entire family while Denise contributed a mere fraction of the cost months late, and only after being asked repeatedly. I never complained because I told myself I was doing it for the children. I had an automated travel savings account at my credit union, strictly putting away $150 every month, separate from my checking. By that spring, it held $2,600, clean, untouched, and earmarked for our next summer escape. But this year, my sister Denise had a completely different, much grander plan. It started on a gray Thursday in March, during a routine custody handoff in her driveway with her ex-husband, Kyle. Kyle was a calculating man who had previously asked me for a $5,000 business loan, which I had clearly and politely declined. He hadn't forgotten the sting of that rejection. As his kids climbed out of his truck, Kyle planted a vindictive seed in Denise's mind, pointing out that our mother was still listed as an authorized user on my bank account. He smirked and told her to use my card to book an extravagant luxury trip, claiming I owed the family for sitting on our father's money. Denise hesitated for mere seconds before letting her greed override her conscience, declaring, "She does owe us." I had absolutely no idea a conspiracy was forming against my finances until April during my niece Madison's 10th birthday party at my mother's house. I arrived with 24 specialty cupcakes, only for Denise to pull me into the quiet corners of the kitchen. With a cold, practiced coldness, she delivered the blow. "We've decided to go to Hilton Head this year. Me, Mom, and the kids. Your kids aren't coming, my kids don't want them there." The words were intentionally designed to cut deep, asserting a cruel emotional hierarchy. As I stood there absorbing the shock, I looked past her into the living room and froze. My mother was standing by the couch, nervously holding a familiar piece of plastic between her fingers, my emergency debit card. It was a card I had left with her 2 years prior, intended strictly for unexpected medical emergencies or urgent groceries. When I demanded to know why she had it, my mother looked away guiltily, stammering that Denise said she needed it to book the vacation. If you have ever had your kindness turned into a target by the very people who are supposed to protect you, do me a favor right now. Take a deep breath, grab your coffee, and type the word boundaries in the comments below. Let me know that you understand exactly what it feels like to realize you are being exploited by your own blood. I didn't scream, and I didn't cause a scene in front of the party guests. I simply looked at my mother and my sister, nodded once, and said, "Keep it." I calmly called my children, picked up our things, and walked out the front door. But as I drove the 14 minutes back to our apartment in complete silence, my mind was shifting from deep emotional hurt into a state of absolute, hyper-focused alignment. They thought they had successfully isolated me and stolen my peace, but they had actually just handed me the ultimate justification to change the rules of the game. That evening, after I got the kids settled into a movie, I sat on the edge of my bed with my phone in my hand, my heart beating in a slow, steady rhythm. I opened my banking application and looked at the transaction history. A month earlier, I had noticed a mysterious $400 withdrawal. When I had called my mother about it, she offered a shaky, flustered excuse about accidentally using the wrong card at the pharmacy, promising she would pay me back. Because I loved her, I had let it slide. But looking closer now, the pattern of exploitation was undeniable. $80 at a random gas station, $120 at Target, $65 at a restaurant I'd never even heard of. Denise had been quietly testing the waters for months, draining my hard-earned money to fund her lifestyle while mapping out an entire cruise vacation behind my back. I closed my eyes and asked myself a rhetorical question that I want to share with you now. Why is it that toxic family dynamics rely so heavily on your predictable compliance? They count on your guilt. They count on the fact that you will stay quiet to avoid a scene, or that you'll keep swallowing the disrespect just to keep the family intact. But the moment you strip away the emotion and look at the situation like a professional bookkeeper, the solution becomes crystal clear. The very next morning, I didn't call Denise to scream at her. I didn't engage in a single text message argument. Instead, I quietly drove down to a completely different credit union on Peachtree Street, right across from the tire shop. I walked inside, sat down with a representative, and opened a brand new checking and savings account, completely disconnected from my old life. With a few clicks, I systematically migrated every single penny I owned. $2,600 from my travel savings, and $1,400 from my primary checking. I left the old account completely active, but I drew the balance down to exactly $12.34. That was the grand sum left waiting for them. I left that account open because I knew that if I legally removed my mother as an authorized user right away, it would take days of paperwork and trigger an immediate alert on her phone, giving Denise time to pivot and find another way to fund her scheme. By leaving the card active with only $12 on it, I was setting up a silent financial wall. When someone holds your bank card like they own it, they aren't trying to keep a relationship safe. They are trying to keep your life under their control. I told absolutely no one what I had done. I went back to work at the veterinary clinic, balanced my invoices, and went home to make dinner for my kids. I allowed Denise and my mother to fully believe that their entitlement was going completely unnoticed, letting them proceed with an unearned confidence that would ultimately become their undoing. The weeks leading up to summer felt incredibly heavy, but they brought an unexpected gift of absolute clarity. One quiet evening, while I was pulling our summer clothes out of the hallway closet to see what still fit the kids, I noticed a dusty brown shoebox hidden away on the very top shelf. It was an old boot box with the words Red Wing printed across the side. My father's preferred brand of work boots. Intrigued, I pulled it down and sat right there on the closet floor, my knees tucked up against my chest. Inside the box was a collection of his ordinary fragments, his old union card, a faded photograph of him, and my mother smiling on the beach at Jekyll Island back in 1988, and a small, crumpled white envelope with my name written across the front in his unmistakable, neat block lettering. It was the exact style of handwriting he used when filling out plumbing work orders under kitchen sinks. He had tucked this envelope inside the larger manila folder at the hospital 4 years ago, but back then, I had been far too broken and raw to open it. I carefully tore open the flap, and a single sheet of lined notebook paper slid out. As I read his words, it felt as though he was sitting right there in the dusty closet with me, speaking directly into the quiet spaces of my heart. Teresa, you're the one who keeps her word. Don't let anyone turn your kindness into a key to your wallet. If the day comes when helping them hurts you, stop. You already kept the lights on long enough. Take your babies to the beach. Dad. 7 simple sentences written by a tired plumber who understood his daughters perfectly, loving them differently. Because they were entirely different people. I folded that note back along its original creases and slid it directly into my wallet, placing it securely right behind my driver's license. I wanted to make sure that every single time I reached for a card, my fingers would feel the physical presence of his protection and permission. Armed with that profound sense of validation, I sat down at my laptop and opened my online banking portal. For 4 straight years, on the first of every single month, a $300 automatic transfer had left my checking account to support my mother, totaling over $14,000 of unappreciated financial care. My mother had a roof over her head, Social Security, and a massive $22,000 emergency fund I had carefully preserved for her. She was perfectly fine. She just preferred using my baseline stability to fund Denise's ongoing demands. With a completely steady hand, I hovered my mouse over the screen and clicked the button to cancel the recurring transfer. A tiny digital window popped up, asking if I was absolutely certain. I pressed confirm, without a single trace of guilt. I immediately sent my mother a brief professional email stating that I had adjusted my personal finances and that the monthly stipend would no longer continue. The emotional fallout was instantaneous. Exactly 2 minutes later, at 9:14 p.m., my phone lit up with my mother's caller ID. When I answered, her voice carried that familiar, sharp pitch that sat somewhere between frantic confusion and deep accusation, demanding to know what she was supposed to do. I calmly reminded her that she had substantial savings and that Denise lived only 10 minutes away and could easily help buy the groceries for once. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the line before she whispered, "I can't believe you would do this to me." I took a sip of my cold coffee, leaned back against the counter, and delivered the truth. "I'm not doing anything to you, Mom. I'm just not doing it for you anymore." She slammed the phone down, and within 20 minutes, the predictable, furious text message from Denise arrived. I didn't type a single word back. I simply flipped my phone face down on the counter, walked into my bedroom, and slept more deeply than I had in years. The true shape of Denise's entitlement became fully transparent on the family group text a week later. She hadn't bothered to remove me from the chat, likely out of a mean-spirited desire to flaunt the luxury I was being excluded from. My phone buzzed during a hectic lunch break at the clinic with a series of high-resolution images. First, a picture of the cruise ship's multi-tiered pool glowing under neon lights. Then, a shot of the panoramic ocean view balcony suites. Finally, Denise sent a screenshot of an upscale seafood restaurant menu with a smug caption. "Mom, I booked the premium sunset dinner cruise for us too. $480. It'll go on the same card." I sat at my desk, quietly chewing my sandwich, and opened my banking app one last time just to verify. There it was. The old account sitting entirely undisturbed at exactly $12.34. Denise was confidently planning to charge thousands of dollars of luxury accommodations and a $480 dinner cruise to a card that couldn't even successfully clear a tank of regular gas. I chose not to reply, dropping no warnings and offering no hints. As a bookkeeper, I knew that some people are completely incapable of learning from gentle advice. They can only truly learn from the blunt finality of the bill. The inevitable financial reckoning officially struck 3 days before their scheduled departure. The cruise line's automated billing system attempted to process the final remaining balance of $3,800 at precisely 10 light a.m. The transaction, instantly declined for insufficient funds, triggering a stark notification to Denise's email address warning that she had exactly 48 hours to provide an alternative method of payment, or her entire reservation would be permanently canceled, forfeiting her original $800 deposit. The text messages and calls came flying in, but I remained an absolute wall of silence. By the next evening, the desperation turned physical. At 8:40 p.m., the bright headlights of Denise's leased Lexus swept across my living room curtains, followed by the aggressive slamming of a car door. When I opened the front door, Denise was standing on my welcome mat, looking utterly unraveled. Her hair was messy, her clothes were wrinkled, and her makeup was completely smudged under her eyes. She didn't even say hello. She immediately hissed, "What did you do with the money?" She said it with a defensive glare, desperately trying to make me feel guilty for protecting my own life. I stood firm, entirely filling the doorway, and kept my voice perfectly level. "My money? It's exactly where it belongs." In my personal account. Just not the one you were actively planning to steal from. Her jaw dropped, her eyes darting around as she tried to find a counter-argument. Steal? Mom is an authorized user on that account, Teresa's? That isn't stealing. Then if it wasn't stealing, I asked calmly, why didn't either of you ask me for permission? The quietness that followed was absolute, punctuated only by the low hum of the porch light. Seeing that her aggressive entitlement had completely failed to move me, Denise's face shifted into a different expression. She dropped her shoulders, let out a shaky breath, and tried to deploy a soft, vulnerable tone. The voice she reserved for when manipulation was her only remaining currency. I'm so sorry, Teresa. I shouldn't have said those things about the kids. But we need this money. The kids are counting on this cruise. Can't you just help us out? For Mom's sake? I looked at her, letting her empty apology sit heavily in the humid night air like a fraudulent check. She didn't regret the profound pain she had caused my daughter Lily, or the exclusion of my son Jake. She only deeply regretted that she had gotten caught with her hand in my pocket. You told my own daughter to her face that she wasn't real family, Denise, I said, my voice entirely devoid of anger, filled only with finality. We are completely done here. I stepped back into my apartment, closed the heavy wooden door, and turned the deadbolt lock. The loud, solid click resonated through the quiet room. Through the window, I watched her stand paralyzed on my mat for 10 long seconds before she violently kicked the small, yellow welcome mat sideways, sprinted back to her car, and sped away into the darkness. The day of departure arrived, and while I was driving my kids south toward Tybee Island with the windows rolled down, a completely different scene was unfolding at the Port of Miami cruise terminal. I would piece the full, humiliating timeline together weeks later from my mother, a few loose admissions from my niece Madison, and a remarkably detailed conversation with Pam Whitfield, who had heard the entire saga straight from the source. Denise's luxury SUV had pulled into the bustling terminal parking lot after a chaotic, tense 4-hour drive. Madison and Tyler had their faces pressed hard against the tinted glass, excitedly pointing at the massive white hull of the cruise ship towering over the water. My mother stepped out of the passenger seat, her knees stiff and cracking from the long ride. Denise, trying desperately to project an aura of wealth and confidence, threw her sunglasses up onto her head, grabbed her designer rolling luggage, and marched into the crowded terminal lobby. When they reached the check-in counter, a young gate agent in a crisp blue uniform took Denise's identification and began typing into the system. After a long, agonizing moment, the agent stopped, frowned at the screen, and typed something else. Ma'am, the agent said, her voice carrying that polite, unyielding customer service tone, I'm showing an unpaid remaining balance of $2,400 on this reservation. The automated system received a partial payment of $2,200 from a secondary credit card yesterday, but our maritime policy requires full payment before boarding passes can be legally issued. As of right now, you are short. Denise's face went completely pale, but she immediately put on a performance. She pulled out her primary credit card, the one she knew was already maxed out to its absolute $3,000 limit from her frantic emergency payments the day before, and slid it across the counter with a practiced, arrogant flick of her wrist. Run it again, she commanded. There must be a glitch in your system. The agent swiped the card, waited 3 seconds, and politely handed it right back. Declined, ma'am. Insufficient funds. My mother, who was sitting in a nearby terminal chair watching the exchange, felt her heart drop. She looked down at her lap, clutching her purse tightly, and whispered, I don't have any more money, Denise. I gave you my last $600 cash from my emergency savings yesterday. I have nothing left. 10-year-old Madison pulled on Denise's arm, her voice rising in panic. Mom, what's happening? Why can't we get our room keys? Where is the ship going? Not now, Madison, Denise snapped, her carefully constructed mask completely slipping away. She grabbed my mother roughly by the elbow and dragged her over to the privacy of a large potted fern near the terminal windows. Her hands were shaking with an aggressive, volatile desperation. Call Teresa, Denise ordered through clenched teeth. Call her right now and tell her she has to wire the money. She's doing this on purpose to humiliate us. My mother pulled out her cell phone, her fingers trembling violently as she dialed my number. 300 miles away, I was standing in knee-deep, refreshing ocean water. I felt my phone buzzing violently inside the mesh beach bag up on the sand, but I didn't move. I just stood there, holding my son Jake's small hand while he pointed excitedly at a dark fin breaking the distant waves. I watched my daughter Lily laughing as she jumped over a gentle crest of foam. My life was perfectly in balance, and the frantic noise of their self-inflicted emergency couldn't reach me anymore. Back at the terminal, after the 20-second unanswered call went straight to my voicemail, Denise completely lost her mind. She marched back to the counter and began screaming at the terminal staff, her voice echoing loudly off the high marble ceilings and the tasteful watercolor paintings decorating the lobby. She accused the cruise line of fraud. She accused me of malicious vindictiveness, and she made an absolute unhinged scene. Other vacationing families pulled their children away from her in disgust, and a tall security supervisor in a sharp navy blazer quickly stepped in, firmly escorting all four of them out of the building and through the automatic sliding doors. They were left standing in the sweltering 95-degree heat of the concrete parking lot. The heavy, humid air rose off the fresh asphalt in visible waves. My mother slowly lowered herself onto a hot concrete bench near the handicap spaces, looking 10 years older than 62. Inside her purse sat a debit card linked to exactly $12, an empty wallet, and a phone displaying 22 desperate, ignored calls. As Denise paced furiously back and forth beside her SUV, muttering about how I had ruined their lives, my mother did something she hadn't done in decades. She cut her oldest daughter off entirely. Teresa didn't ruin anything, Denise, my mother said, her voice sounding small, deflated, and utterly exhausted. I asked her for the money weeks ago, and she clearly told me no. You told me to use her card anyway because you promised me she would never notice. You told me you would stop bringing my grandchildren to see me if I didn't give you that card. The absolute ugly truth was finally out in the open, sitting under the blinding Florida sun. Madison and Tyler were sitting in the back seat of the open SUV, hot, tired, and deeply embarrassed. Madison pulled up her phone, opened her Instagram feed, and quietly handed it to my mother. On the screen was a picture I had posted an hour earlier, Lily and Jake on Tybee Island, covered in sand, smiling radiantly beside a lopsided sandcastle. My mother stared at the image of her grandchildren, laughing on a beach without her. She slowly closed her eyes, turned to her oldest daughter, and asked the ultimate, heartbreaking question. Denise, what on earth have we done? We returned home from Tybee Island on a balmy Sunday afternoon, our skin tan, our bodies tired, and our hearts completely full. The very next morning, before I had even clocked into my desk at Dr. Calloway's veterinary clinic, Jake was already bounding around the office, eagerly telling Dr. Calloway all about the dolphin we had spotted right next to our kayaks. He held his small arms out as wide as they could go, exaggerating the distance from 10 feet to 10 inches. Dr. Calloway knelt down and listened with that profound, patient warmth she usually reserved for nervous pet owners, making him feel like his little beach adventure was the most important news in the world. By Tuesday afternoon, the inevitable call came. I walked out to my car during my break, rolled the windows down to let the summer breeze circulate, and answered my mother's call. Her voice didn't carry the sharp, defensive edge from the week before. She sounded quiet, subdued, and incredibly small, as she asked if we could talk so she could apologize. I turned the key back in the ignition so the radio went silent. "You can talk, Mom," I said, keeping my tone perfectly grounded. "I'm listening." She stammered through her explanation, admitting she never should have let Denise dictate the terms of our family relationship, and claiming she had no idea Denise intended to charge thousands of dollars to my emergency card. "But you knew she was planning to charge something, Mom," I replied, watching a crow land on the edge of the clinic dumpster across the pavement. I let the truth of that statement sit in the air for a moment before continuing. "I love you, but from this day forward, my finances are completely mine. No shared accounts, no emergency cards left at your house, and no financial access whatsoever. If you want to see Lily and Jake, you are welcome to come over any Sunday you like. But I am officially done funding vacation plans that require my wallet but exclude my children. I am not angry, Mom. I am just done being the family subscription service." She didn't argue. She just let out a shallow, quiet breath and whispered, "Okay." It was a slow, heavy admission, but understanding isn't an instant switch. It's a gradual process, like water slowly wearing a smooth groove into solid stone. 3 weeks later, the structural shift in our family became completely visible at our annual town potluck inside the community center. The large room smelled of sweet pulled pork, fresh coleslaw, and dozens of homemade casseroles. I walked in holding a bowl of potato salad, with Lily and Jake trailing close behind. Across the crowded room, near the dessert table, I made brief, direct eye contact with Denise. For the first time in her life, her eyes slid away from mine. She looked straight down at her paper plate, completely stripped of her usual arrogance. There was no explosive courtroom confrontation, no dramatic shouting match. Real life doesn't always need a theatrical climax. Sometimes justice is just standing on opposite sides of a crowded community room, quietly eating barbecue. Before the night ended, my 10-year-old niece, Madison, broke away from Denise's table and ran directly up to me, asking if Lily could come outside to play on the swings. Whatever cruel lies Denise had tried to feed her about who was real family clearly hadn't stuck to her innocent heart. I smiled, squeezed her hand, and watched the two girls sprint out toward the playground together, completely unburdened by the greed of the adults around them. Denise watched them go from a distance, said absolutely nothing to anyone, and quietly packed up her things to leave before the pies were even sliced. As I sat there on the beach blanket on our last night at Tybee Island, I remembered a moment right before sunset. Jake had run up to me with his fist raised high like a trophy, proudly placing a sand dollar into my palm. It was completely split right down the middle, one half visibly larger than the other. He had looked up at me through his shark goggles and asked, "Is it still good if it's broken, Mommy?" I had run my thumb gently over the rough, fractured edge of the shell, thinking about my father's note resting safely in my wallet, and I told him the absolute truth. The best ones always are, buddy. If someone in your life requires you to surrender your boundaries or hand over your bank card just to maintain your place at the family table, you were never truly a part of that family. You were just the person funding it. Take your power back, protect your babies, and never let anyone mistake your kindness for a baseline subscription to your life. Thank you so much for sitting with me today over this coffee. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment with your own journey, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I'll see you in the very next story.